It should have been a deadly car accident, but it was actually a miracle in the making. See how a young boy died and went to heaven on the night of the wreck, and see the amazing gift from God that Aldo and his mother are sharing with the world.
After the accident, we all fell out of the car, and me and my husband tried to figure out where the children were, and they wasn't in the car anymore. So I ran around in a dark night to find my children, and that was really the worst day of my life, to realize they were not in the car anymore. We found the little one, and he was first out of the car. And then he was explaining later to us, because he only had a couple of bruises and cuts, that Jesus caught him. And the moment he said that, I thought, you know, we taught our children nice. I didn't take it serious. And then I found my son at the opposite of the highway, on the other side of the highway.
But it was dark. How did you find him there?
You know, I was running around, and as I was running around, I asked the Lord, Lord, help me. And the next thing, the Spirit of God just led me to the other side of the highway, and I just fell over his body. So I spoke to him, but he was already in a coma, so I thought he was dead. While I was busy with him trying to figure out if he was alive or not, a car tried to avoid the accident scene and where all the people stopped. So he went in the bush, and this is exactly where we were. So I jumped up because I realized this car is going to drive over us. And as I jumped up and I looked into the lights of the vehicle, a very strange thing happened to me. My whole body starts shaking, but not like when you're cold. It's like really, really shaking. The next thing after the shaking, the heat, it's like fire. I could tell where it went. It went right through my whole body. And after that, I could say it's here and then at my feet. And right after that, the peace of the living God was with me. And to have peace in this worst situation,
it's almost impossible to imagine.
Absolutely. But that is when the presence of God is there, then you have that peace. When I had this peace, he was in heaven. After he was in a coma for months, and he came out of the coma, but he couldn't speak. The only thing that he could do was write. And then he was explaining while he was writing to me. That night, on that accident scene, I looked into Jesus' eyes, the Messiah's eyes, where he took him, picked him up, and took him to heaven, where he was in heaven the whole time. And God was teaching him the Word. The Word of God is today in his heart. When he writes, he would just download scriptures. And he also said, you know, if you did not surrender me, Mommy, to Jesus, I would have been dead.
How did he know that you surrendered him to Jesus?
For me, that was the strangest part, because he could not, because he was in a coma in my eyes. But while he was on the machines and they told me they're going to stop the machines, I ran opposite ICU. I stayed in a room. I ran into the room and I did a strange thing in my eyes. I took my jacket and I pulled it over my face. And I didn't know it then, but today I know this is like a prayer closet. And I called out to the Lord. And
we Jewish people used to take our talit and put it, and so we still do it today, over our head, and that's what Jesus did when he said go into a closet, meaning the talit or prayer shawl over your head.
And then God spoke to me in an audible voice, and he said to me, are you willing to surrender him to me? And I really was not ready. But God asked that from Abram, and he asked it for all of us, because he was like an idol in my life. And God don't want us to have idols. And he wants to be our first love. And that is why I needed to surrender him. And that is why he could know that I surrendered him to Jesus. And he said to me in this letter, if you did not surrender me, I would have been dead.
Well, you know, the thing that is really hard for me to comprehend is when I look at your book, A Message from God, it says, I want to dedicate this book to Dwayne and Anton in heaven. What is this all about?
Well, the time while he was in heaven, God showed him the whole place and the houses and the children and the babies and everything. And then he came back. And one day he starts writing about the 2 children he saw in heaven. So he gave the addresses of the parents, and he was telling about both children, how they are so happy in heaven, but they do not want to come back. But their children are worried about the parents. Have they ever surrendered their life to Jesus? And he gave this little letter and say, your son is happy, he's healed, he's complete. But what about you? So I was really thinking, this medicine is too strong. How can this be? And I just kept the letters separate. And one day a friend visited us, and he was writing because he couldn't speak and saying, my mother's not obedient to God's voice. And I said, what do you mean? He says, those 2 letters. So this friend of mine took the 2 letters.
Well, how could you find these 2 kids that he met in heaven?
He gave the address. He says...
He had the address?
Yes, he says...
How could he know the address?
It's impossible.
When he came back to life and you're nursing him at home, what was wrong with him physically?
He had a very bad head injury. So with a head injury, he had a midbrain, brain stem, the left side, the right side. He couldn't walk, he couldn't talk, he couldn't speak, he couldn't eat. He could do nothing. He could really do nothing. That's why we took him home. They actually gave us an address and said, book him in there. But we took him home because I knew what God said to me. God said to me, I'm going to heal this child. And this child is going to tell the world that Jesus is alive. So we took him home and we nursed him. And for months he was blind. He couldn't speak and anything of that. But while we were keeping on speaking life into him, God was healing him day by day by day. And then eventually the one eye opened, but the other eye was still blind. And after the nurses left, he slept in front of my bed. And that night he woke me. He couldn't speak. He was writing. He woke me and he said he wants to write something. He said to me, did you see Jesus? I said, no. He said he was right here in the room. I said, no, I had a dream. Like you speak to Jesus, but in a dream. He says, no, Mommy, he was here. He touched my eye. And the first thing I said to him, can you see now?
Of course.
And he says, no. And I cried out to the Lord. I said, Lord, I need a miracle now. He says, no, you need faith now. Faith. And then 2 weeks later, as I came back one night, that blind eye was still open because every night you had to put self in to close it. And the blind eye was open, and I was just kneeling and praying softly in my spirit team. And afterwards, I just give him a kiss like this, and he did it back. And the blind eye was open, and the other one was asleep. And I asked him loud, can you see me? And he just showed me yes. And he kept on writing. He said, I told you he was here, and he touched my eye. And there I realized God's timing is just different than ours. But what God started, he will complete in our lives.
Now, he is actually receiving messages from God, and he's writing these messages down, and you have these messages in your book. Give me an example of one of the messages.
One of the messages was, well, a couple of months ago, he woke me, he wrote this morning, he said to me, Mommy, Jesus spoke to me last night about his word and he's coming again. And these letters is on the website, you can see it there, which is going to be very, very, very soon. Do you know that, Mummy? And then he would tell about the bride. Jesus wants to come and fetch his bride, but his bride is not ready.
Tell me about, because this is amazing, when he was weeping one day about the Golden Bridge.
Yes. He can't cry like he normally cries, so he would just make noises, and he was laying his head on his arms and crying. And I said, why are you crying? He says, in heaven there's a golden bridge. And after the bridge there's a huge door with pearls around it. He says, but there's people standing outside and they're crying. I said, why are they crying? He says, they can't go in. And I said, into what? He looked at me and said, don't tell me you don't know. I said, no, I'm not sure. He says, there's a wedding feast inside and everybody's not ready. So every day he will journal a whole page. That next morning he only did this. He wrote Matthew 25 and he left for school.